put up Jenna's tweet, and this was in response to Governor DeSantis's stripping Disney World of some of their tax exemptions and their special liberties that they have out there. So this is from Charles C.W. Koch. He said, Governor DeSantis and the legislature pushed through a sensible education bill and then stared down Disney's ridiculous, hysterical criticisms. They fought, they won. There is no need for them to salt the earth, take revenge, or make Florida's policies worse. And then, Jenna, you were able to quote tweet that and said he's right. Imagine if Governor Newsom out of California was doing this to Chick-fil-A. Policy and law must be fair and reasonable, not vengeful. So the question is, too, and this is a part of the thread before we get your response to this, as much as I disagree with Disney's corporate statement, they have a right to speak and support or not support legislation without government consequences. Their customers have a right to react with their dollars. DeSantis is over the line here.
Yes. So the bottom line of this argument is that we can, the state of Florida can contemplate whether or not Disney Special District is a good thing, but not for the purpose of retaliation for exercising free speech. Mm-hmm. That's the problem that I have with it. And so if anyone, whether a person or a corporation under the law, that's the same thing, corporations are people, are exercising a constitutionally protected right, like disagreeing with what's going on in the legislature. They need to have the freedom to do that without government retaliation. And the state of Florida and Ron DeSantis, who has even fundraised off this issue now, is saying, we're going after them because they're so woke, and we want to make an example out of them. And government cannot retaliate like that. And so what should have happened, and the timeline here is important, because the Parental Rights and Education Bill happened.
It's not called the Don't Say Gay bill?
Shocker, right?
What?
Yeah. So
news to me.
Then, news to Disney apparently, because they put up a tweet that was against that and said, we're going to use our resources to fight against it. That's okay. That's their right. I disagree with them, but that's their right. And then the Parental Rights and Education Bill passed anyway. Mm-hmm. That's how politics and policy works. And that's how the legislative process is. If it had stopped there, no problem. But then after that, because of Disney's statement, then the state of Florida introduced another bill saying we are going to retaliate by removing a special protection to then retaliate against you for coming out as woke.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but just to play devil's advocate, let's say, though, Governor DeSantis was saying, well, it's not necessarily in retaliation of them saying something I didn't like, but because of all of the press and just the controversy surrounding Disney, I just looked into it anyway. And because they were on my mind, I realized, maybe these special tax exemptions and special treatment Disney gets really isn't fair or right, and we should just end that.
Then that becomes a different question, because the same lawful action for any other purpose other than retaliation can be fully legal. And so if the state of Florida wanted to look at this in isolation and totally separately and go, we don't actually want to give these special privileges to Disney anymore, let's sunset this bill. Mm-hmm. They could have done that. But because there is so much evidence and, in my view, admissions from the state of Florida and Governor DeSantis, that's where it's in the territory of retaliation. So under the law, if Disney were to sue, First Amendment retaliation litigation would require that Disney prove that at least in part this action was motivated by retaliation. The burden of proof is on them, but the state of Florida is just kind of making it really easy.
So do you believe, Jenna, that Governor DeSantis cracking down on Disney special exemptions in the state of Florida is just as dangerous a threat to free speech as Twitter censoring conservatives?
Absolutely. And I think that it's a different contemplation because Twitter is not government. Even though we can have the Section 230 conversation, I think the equivalent, danger to free speech, yes, but the equivalent would be, let's say that Disney had this special district in California where Gavin Newsom is the governor, and they came out against the abortion bill that allows for abortions even after birth up to 28 days. And Disney said, we don't agree with this. We're going to fight this. And then Governor Newsom said, well, in retaliation for that, I'm going to go after Disney and some kind of special privilege we give you in the state of California. That would also be a problem. So for conservatives, we have to make sure equal protection under the law abides by everybody's viewpoint, and when government is being used as a tool to retaliate against someone's opinion and someone's free speech, we should always stand up for the speech, even if we disagree with the content. And I fully disagree with Disney's content, but I stand up for their right to say it.
Wow, this is like, it doesn't really happen a lot where I hear something, you know, that really changes my mind as a conservative, like, are conservatives wrong on this issue? And maybe Jenna Ellis has convinced me.
That's why we have to have conversations here. Like, I
Yes.
sit down on this
Yes.
couch. I know we were talking before the show. I'm like, I'm not a lawyer. This isn't debate night with Charlie Kirk. Like, here it's just like, we saw a tweet. We saw you try to explain that tweet. And there's only so much explanation you can put there. And then obviously there's going to be a lot of people in the conservative circles that'd be like, well, it seems like Jenna's with grooming. Yeah. It's like,
That was
Yeah,
bad.
I'm
I
a
saw
rhino
that.
and a
hate
traitor
that.
and a
I
grifter
hate
now,
that.
you
No, even
guys.
Jeremy Boring, the CEO of Daily Wire, said it takes your stance.
Similar,
He
yeah.
agrees.
Yes, and we had a conversation about it. I mean,
Oh.
Jeremy is a good friend, and I so appreciate that people like you, John and Alex, and like Jeremy and Andrew Clavin, whose show is also on today, they're willing to have these conversations. And even if at the end of the day I didn't convince you, we had the conversation,
Yes.
and we had a conversation about the real issue, not just personal attacks and saying, well, wait a second, I categorized you as, you know, part of Team MAGA. So therefore, if you go against something that I feel is wrong, suddenly then you're off the team. I even had people tweet, you know, Jenna needs to be punished for going against us. And I'm like, where's my
we
card
go.
that says
Hot,
otherwise?
hot take though, but there has become in the last 4 or 5 years or so, I think, a subset of the conservative movement that is just as brainwashed and just as cancel culture heavy as the far left. It's gotten really similar to me in the conservative movement in some parts like the left.
That's one thing I've definitely noticed, and it's really getting sickening at this point, is that if you disagree even the slightest bit, you're automatically a fake patriot, you're a rhino, you're this, that, and the third. If you don't walk lockstep, and it's like, that sounds like the left.
And if,
Are we doing the same thing?
yeah, well, I mean, I think if we actively want to combat that, the importance of shows like these becomes even more relevant, right? Where you can have a long-form discussion
Yes.
and allow her to voice her opinion to hosts and have the back and forth, the dialogue, the devil's advocate, if you will, in a very neutral setting instead of this just barrage of hate that seems to only exist on social media, but candidly doesn't really exist in real America, right? It's limited to our social media interactions where we're behind a screen and willing to lash out in a really negative way. And it's only once you sit down and you talk face to face that the gloves kind of come back on and you have that more mature discussion.